Good morning. This is Pastor Alan Hathaway from the Garrison Church of God. Our services here in Garrison begin at 10:30 this morning, but I also pastor the Riverdale Community Church, and our service there begins at 8:30 on Sunday. So we would love to have you come and be a part of either of these services today. I want to talk to you about a message based on Thanksgiving. Thanks means a lot. And I'm taking my thoughts out of Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 through 17 today. Thankfulness is the foundation of a positive attitude and a lifestyle in this world. One of the interesting words that we use, or comes actually directly out of the Greek New Testament, is a word that we use very often for this particular celebration in our churches. And these are communion cups that we are using presently because of COVID-19. But it is a reflection of what is called the Eucharist. And the particular word that Paul uses quite a bit in his writings is the word Eucharisto, or Eucharizos. It is a meaning of the idea of giving thanks. And so when we partake of communion, we are in a sense giving thanks, and that comes from Jesus' giving thanks over the elements of communion. And so that's where we get the word from. It also is a word that Paul uses in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 to describe the elements of the communion. They are those things that we give thanks over, the bread and the cup. But the word is a much more interesting word than just the name of a celebration that we do in our churches. It is also a word that talks very powerfully about giving thanks. There was a time in American history when Thanksgiving became an important reality. The woman who was responsible for Thanksgiving in our nation was a woman by the name of Sarah Josepha Buell Hale. She was born in 1788 and she died in 1879. She began in 1846 to advocate for the creation of the national holiday known as Thanksgiving. She was a popular writer during the 1800s. In fact, she came to edit the most important manners and cultural magazine in the United States at the time, Godey's Ladies' Journal. She wrote quite a bit of the articles for it herself. It was unique in American publication at the time because she encouraged American writers with her magazine. Most of the other periodicals that were being published in the United States at the time actually were using English writers from England and Britain whose articles were republished in periodicals here in the United States. She intentionally used American authors. She also published in her magazine house plans, and they were picked up by many builders around the country, and as a result, improved housing in the United States as a result of her ideas and concepts in this area. She also was an advocate for women in becoming involved in professions, and she encouraged women in education. Her parents had encouraged her in an education, so she was interested in that happening for women. She also was a staunch abolitionist. In fact, in 1827, she wrote the first truly abolitionist public novel, and it set the standard for a lot of abolitionist writings from that point on. It would have a dramatic impact on her attempt to get Thanksgiving recognized as a national holiday. Because of her abolitionist activities, most of the southern slave states would not even consider a national holiday of Thanksgiving simply because it was connected with her. And she is an interesting lady in so many different ways. She began writing to every U.S. president at that point and encouraging him to put out a national proclamation of Thanksgiving. She lived through one of the most difficult times in American history. Beginning in the 1850s, the Kansas-Nebraska Act tried to work its way around the Missouri Compromise from the 1830s. That compromise had developed a system of admitting new states into the Union, that for every state that was a free state or a slave state, there would be an equal number brought in so that the United States legislative balance wouldn't be changed. Missouri was allowed to enter the Union even though it was above the Mason-Dixon line. And the reason for that was that with the Missouri Compromise, they established the Mason-Dixon line so that slavery would not be allowed above that. When Kansas was about to be admitted to the Union as a state, there was a strong push among Southern plantation owners to open new territories for the production of cotton, and that required, in their understanding, slave labor. That was a difficult situation. Cotton was a huge cash crop during that period of time. With the invention of the cotton gin, it allowed the combing out of the seeds in cotton relatively easy. And as a result, cotton became a very sought-after commodity around the world, particularly in Britain, for the production of garments. That changed everything because cotton wore out the soil. And so they had to continually find new soil or new areas where they could grow cotton if they were to continue the process of growing it. This became a serious war. In 1854, with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, war broke out in Kansas. People were killed over this issue. It became a serious situation, and it came to be called Bloody Kansas. In 1857, a case that would increase the intimidation and the problems in our country was heard before the Supreme Court of the United States. That was called the Dred Scott case. Dred Scott had been a slave that had been employed or basically his services sold while he was living in the North by his master. He claimed then that because he had served basically as a wage laborer in the North, that he was entitled to be free since he was in a free state. This eventually worked its way up to the Supreme Court. To the shock of most people, Dred Scott not only was not allowed to be freed, the Supreme Court declared that black people were not allowed to be citizens of the United States because, in the opinion of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, they were not fully human. In addition to that, he struck down the Missouri Compromise. It was one of the most devastating decisions in American history. Kansas exploded. There was open arm rebellion around the United States, and John Brown exported that to Virginia. It became a running battle between the sides. And that civil war that began in Kansas in 1861 exploded all over the United States. It became a devastating experience. The brutality of that war had not been seen before. In 1863, Sarah Hale sent a letter to Abraham Lincoln, noticing that the severity of the war and noticing that Lincoln had changed the dynamics of the war by issuing the Emancipation Proclamation. She recommended again to him that he consider a proclamation of thanksgiving. It was a difficult decision for Lincoln. He was in the midst of a very difficult year. 1863, even though the Emancipation Proclamation had begun in January, it had not had the impact on the abolitionist cause that he had hoped. It had pushed England off from joining the southern states, but it had not had the impact in the United States that he needed. He desperately needed a victory. They were having a hard time keeping soldiers enlisted. And in August or in July of that year, Gettysburg had been a victory, but it had been a victory by the skin of his teeth. It was not an easy victory. Abraham Lincoln had called for a national draft, and in 1863, on July 11th, it was enacted. It caused riots in New York City, dangerous, explosive riots all over the United States. And Lincoln had a very difficult 2 months in desperately trying to gain control again of a country that was spinning out of control. He was willing to take a gamble. And in October, he declared that on the last Thursday in November, there would be a national day of thanksgiving. That, combined with the Gettysburg Address on November 16th, turned the tide of Union sentiment and gave them the courage and direction to go forward with the war. Had that not all happened, we would not have the country we have. It was an important point, and Thanksgiving was at the very center of it. For in Lincoln's proclamation of Thanksgiving, he called upon our nation to pray, to confess our failures, and to give thanks to God for his benefits and blessings. It is interesting that Thanksgiving is most appropriate in those dark times of our lives, those difficult times. Research on gratitude has taught us that people that are grateful are actually better at weathering difficult times because they look beyond themselves. They look to the future. And that is important for us. The Apostle Paul would tell us that none of us lives to himself and none of us dies to himself. It is with thanksgiving that we discover God's purpose and plan in our lives. As we are grateful to God and to our fellow human beings, and as we are grateful for the wonderful opportunities we have, it is a way for us to reflect that God is really in control. And so I am thankful today. I am thankful that God is in control. And I am thankful for the many people that have blessed my life and continue to bless my life. Are you thankful? I hope you are. God's blessings on you. Have a wonderful day and have a wonderful Thanksgiving.